Hi, everybody. You are listening to the OMO comic book show. That's short for Old Man Orange. Old Man Orange, for those of you who don't know, is a pre existing podcast which features me, Ryan Dunnigan, and my good friend Spencer Scott Holmes. Now, usually the way that show runs, it's just the two of us talking about whatever comes to mind, and just given our interest, it's usually movies, whatever comic book or video game just came out that we happen to be into. Now, we do talk about comics a lot on our show, but this one's going to be a bit different. This one is much more focusing on strange, obscure books that maybe we didn't have time to get into on the show. And I see this is going to be more of an experiment. I'm not used to doing a one-person show. I'm used to having Spencer or someone else to bounce off of. So this is going to be a little bit of an experiment here. I'm going to try this out. This may be a one and done, or this may start up a whole new series. I don't see it being as long as the regular show either, but for the time being, think of it as kind of like a fucked up reading rainbow with comics, where I just come in, I share 1 to 2 books that I came across that I think people might find interesting. Now, I guess the one sort of rule we're going to have for the show is we're going to try to avoid Marvel and DC type stuff. Not all Marvel and DC, but like your main Marvel and DC stuff like Spider-Man or Batman or Superman, those kind of things. Because we talk about that on our regular show all the time. So I think we're going to try and keep it to more obscure, lesser known books, or if it is from one of the major publishers, maybe something that's a little bit more from left field. Anyway, we'll get the show going here. So we're going to jump into the first book here. First book's going to be a little bit more classier than the second book. So think of the first one as your main course, second one being dessert. This first one, it's a book called 5,000 Kilometers Per Second. Now, I'm not going to lie. If you told me about this book and if I saw it sitting on a bookshelf at a comic book store, I probably would not have picked this up. But I'm part of there's a comic book store I go to called Comics Experience, and a comics spelt with an X. And they have this book club thing. It's a really cool store. They got this book club thing where the staff picks one of their favorite books, graphic novels that came out that month. And then they'll try to get the author of the book or someone who worked on the book over, whether it be in person or Skype, and do kind of a book club meeting for the whole thing. Unfortunately, I was not able to make it to this particular meeting, but I'm glad I'm part of the club because I wouldn't have read or got this book otherwise. And this was a very enjoyable book. I feel like this book could have almost been like because I'm not going to lie, when I read a comic book, I'm usually looking for something with a lot of action, a lot of fantasy or science fiction, or a lot of violence, because I'm just that kind of person, I guess. Now, this book feels like it could almost be a independent foreign film. It's essentially, well, the back of it says it's almost a love story, which that's kind of a good way of putting it. It's about this, it starts off with a young couple in Italy meeting each other, falling in love, and kind of sort of a summer fling kind of thing. And then it jumps a few years later, and we kind of see the breakup, a very unceremonious, sad, kind of bitter breakup, and then how their lives kind of carry on and go their two different directions. And we see it in a way where both characters are living very different lives, and they're going things about it the way they know how, but yet they still kind of sink into each other's lives, and they assume the other doesn't think about one another. They assume that, well, that was that, now we're moving on, yet they keep on both wondering how the other is doing and what the other has done. And even though we see in certain moments one is clearly doing better than the other, or vice versa, that there's this sense of kind of like neither of them entirely got over it. Now, the two main characters, Piero and Lucia, we kind of see their lives diverge and go on to their own different points until they converge again at the very end. There's also a third character, Nicola. When Lucia and Piero meet at the very beginning of the book, Nicola is his best friend, and they kind of got this camaraderie. The three of them are these three closest friends, and you get the sense that Piero is kind of like, hey, dude, why always kind of like coming on to my girl here? But they're always kind of nudging each other, like, ha ha ha, joking. But then at the same time, even though you can see Piero really likes Nicola, he has a little bit of this sense of like, hey man, what the fuck? But anyway, we don't see that too long because eventually we jump ahead, and when their lives go their own different directions, we see Lucia gets married. She's pregnant with a kid. That relationship ends. Nick, and she's very much living a very kind of housewife existence, because at the very beginning they get across the point that like they live in this small little town in Italy, and like nothing ever changes here, we got to get out of here at some point. And Piero almost seems kind of like, I don't know if I will, where Lucia goes off into Germany, I believe, like I said earlier, I believe it's Germany, meets somebody, and from there she almost kind of settles down. Then we jump to what Piero's up to. Piero's in Egypt. He's an archaeologist, and from there he's in a phone call. He has a phone call. And we realize he's kind of in a odd relationship with someone else, and that he has a kid on the way. So as time goes on, the two of them get in contact with each other and they meet up. In hindsight, it's a very short story, but it's a very good story at the same time. It's a very, very quick read. They kind of come together one particular night, and it's a couple years later, and it's one of those things where it's like the person you met many years ago is not the same person they are now. There are various moments in Piero's travels in Egypt. It's kind of all in a montage and a couple other random spots where he almost has these daylight dreams of Lucia. He'll see a woman, and then he'll almost imagine her stripping naked, and she'll be Lucia. There's a part where he is just going around parts of Egypt on a motorcycle, exploring things. And there's a few moments where he's imagining he's doing it with Lucia, like she's along the ride with him. And then Nicola comes in. And then as he goes on the trip, he imagines Nicola fucking her. Like wherever he looks, he just sees like the two of them fucking. Like this is haunting him. And in some ways it's kind of creepy, because even though I think no guy wants to see like their girlfriend or their ex-girlfriend get fucked by their best friend, it's kind of creepy because she has this weird soulless look in her face while it's happening, kind of a half smirk as well. So it makes it a little kind of extra haunting and kind of off-putting. Now, what's the thing that's interesting about that is that he's kind of remembering her of the girl he knew back when they first met. And she's this young, cute Italian girl who wants to see the world and is very adventurous. When they finally meet up at the end, I mean, you know, he's balding. He's kind of in a marriage that he's not really happy with. She's divorced and she's overweight. And it's not like we see a slight tiptoe towards this, but then one day we turn the page and it's drastically different from who they were to each other then and who they are now. Everything in this book is leading up to them going back to their hometown and having one single date, just one more date. And it starts off with them having a nice dinner. Everything seems to be pretty civil. They're getting along and they're just laughing and having a few glasses of wine. Eventually, though, Piero goes down the route he knows he shouldn't, but he can't help himself. He has to bring up Nicola and says, come on, you were fucking Nicola at some point. Come on. You always liked him, right? Was that the reason you broke up with me in the first place? And it just gets awkward, and he tries to cover it up. He gets kind of almost belligerent about it for a minute, but then he kind of covers it up like, oh, God, that was an asshole thing to do. Would I fucking do that? He blames on the wine, and sure enough, though, that still leads the two of them going back to a hotel. When that happens, a sex scene happens, but it is quite possibly one of the most unsexiest, most awkward sex scenes. And not like in a funny American Pie, ha 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 kind of way. In just this really, it's almost kind of depressing. you see, because it's awkward on both levels. The two of them come in. It's the first time they've seen each other in years, and they remember these times when they were hot and young and just madly in love with each other, and now they're just like, oh, we're middle aged, you're overweight, I'm balding. Okay, let's make this happen. It's a very, she's like, don't look at me. Like, what? Close your eyes. I don't want you looking at me when we do this. Like, okay. And then it's like a two pump chump scenario. The guy, Piero, like can't even make her come or anything. It's a very quick climax. Ugh, like he just it ends like that. He's like, that's it. Like, yeah, it's okay. We can go again. Like, no, that's it. We're done. And it's just such a depressing kind of sad because you're expecting this is their come around. This is no pun intended, but this is their second chance maybe for them to come back and possibly fix things, kind of recapture that, but it's kind of gone. And I give the book credit for kind of having the guts to do that, because a lot of times other books, I feel like, or other stories in general, would try to make this like there's still something there. It's like, no, that's gone. It's kind of not there. And even like they still both sort of have these feelings for each other, but it's not the same thing of what it once was. After that, they're walking down the streets of where they grew up, just talking, saying, "Oh, so what was Egypt like and whatnot?" And he says, "Oh, Egypt, it's whatever." And Lucia's like, you don't sell yourself short. You saw the world. I think you shouldn't live in the past because, we've changed. This place we're in sure hasn't changed. So try to just, be optimistic. And then she calls him a cab. He gets in as he's about to leave. He's like, I was right about Nicola, though, right? Wasn't I? She's like, you gotta go. He leaves. He sees her off in the distance. And once he's out of sight, guess who comes out of the shadows? Nicola. Like, he says, did you guys have a good time? Like, yeah, we had a good time. They walk off together very solemnly. And this is a really good book. It's very, I'm not even going to say bittersweet. I'm going to say kind of bitter, but, it's I guess the most kind of like maybe like a sour beer. Something like that. I don't want to sound pretentious or too hipstery there, but it's it doesn't have like this come around like something like 500 Days of Summer. It ends on this note of like, it wasn't meant to happen, but I'm glad it did happen, and it was really nice, and there's still hope for you for someone else. This ends on the note of like, yeah, it's done. It's time to move on. Get that put up behind you. Just keep going. And I kind of like the bravery it had to do that. So that's why I am really recommending everyone check out 500 kilometers per second, written by Manuel Fior. Okay, folks, now time for the second book. Now, here's the thing. Fur is highbrow and classy, is the last one may have seemed I'm about to just totally drop the ball and all that. It's gonna go in a weird direction unless you didn't see my previous post earlier in the week. That you probably didn't had no idea where it was going, or unless you actually just read the title, what's in the info and all that. The book I came across was the comic book adaptation Super Mario Adventures. Now I'm just gonna say right here, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. This is blatantly a kid's book. It definitely is most certainly a kid's book. Funny thing though, back when Nintendo Power was around, which was, for those of you who don't know, that was a video game magazine dedicated strictly to Nintendo games. It was one in the back in the like 90s. They would actually have like every month a comic strip of a continual story of a franchise of theirs, whether it be Zelda, Mario, or I think there's even a Star Fox one. I remember coming across them when I was a kid and just seeing, goddamn phone, goddamn Twitter. I should have it out, but I'm not. I remember coming across this book as a kid, or it's like random issues, and just saying, "Oh my God, there's a Mario comic in this thing." Because back then it was kind of harder to find this stuff. We didn't have the internet; you'd have to just hope you stumbled upon it or had a subscription, which I didn't have. So I would just catch random issues from my friends. So it was one of those things where I was like, I remember coming across it as a kid and seeing like, oh well, that's cool, but I guess I'll never see that again, you know. And then, you know, years later, I'm walking through one of my favorite bookstores here, Green Apple Books, and I just see the Mario font on sticking out. I'm like, what is that? And I just grabbed this thing, like, oh my god, this is that book that I skimmed, or like issues of that comic that I skimmed back in kindergarten. And I could not believe it. I even recognized certain panels from back then. I don't remember a lot from back then. Granted, most of it is like television and like Smashing Pumpkins music videos and whatnot like that. It's the usual Mario and Luigi dynamic. Mario being the brave, courageous brother, Luigi being kind of like the ass end of a lot of jokes. Yet something that really stands out is, I believe not too long ago, somebody put out an article, like I believe I heard this on VG times 3, which is Paint It Black's video game podcast. So they pointed out that somebody wrote an article, like there was an anti-Mario article saying how Princess Peach is a very stereotypical character, it's very sexist, it's time to move past that. This book right here, whoever said that, I mean, I know this is a very obscure reference, but this book right here, this is actually the strongest I've ever seen her. They still got to save her a few times, but every chance she gets, she is kind of going after Bowser. There's a time or two where she's caught in a cage, but she gets out of there herself, and she's almost like one of, I never thought I'd say this in a Mario book, but Princess Peach, but this is before she was Peach, back when she was Toadstool, is one of the strongest characters in this whole book. She at some point gets a bunch of bombs, goes to the Koopa kids with a big sack of bombs, like, I'm gonna blow this motherfucker up unless you let Mario go. They're like, you're not gonna do it, try me. One thing that's also kind of interesting is after, I guess for the last about 10 or maybe even, you know, I'll lowball it, I'll say 10 years, Mario hasn't really had a voice. He said catchphrases, but he's almost become kind of like Link, to where they kind of prefer the player to interpret what he's saying. They'll have other characters talk. And I know back in, you know, there's the Bob Hoskins movie, and then there's the not so great 1990s various versions of the Mario Brothers cartoon, which I know a lot of people say the movie wasn't so great, but I don't give a shit. I got a really warm spot in my heart for that movie. I know it's flawed, but I love that movie. Regardless, though, so there's times then we saw Mario talk. We're at the point now where like he doesn't really even talk anymore. He just kind of says a catchphrase, like "It's a me," but it's kind of weird seeing him as a fully fleshed out character and seeing him this very. He's kind of who you'd expect him to be. It's not like as weird as, you know, I think that we kind of, if they were to make a Zelda movie and Link was to talk, it would seem kind of weird. We're at the point, though, if they did make another Mario movie and Mario talked, it wouldn't seem as weird. It would make more sense. But it's just kind of interesting going back and seeing Mario as this fully functional character with a lot of, with very much his own voice. And he's very much just, you know, he's kind of there is, you know, this book is part comedy, a lot of comic relief in this movie. Usually the Mario brothers kind of bumbling their way into saving Peach. There's some of the humor in it is actually kind of more clever than you'd expect it to be. Like, once again, this book, just let me clarify. This book is not for anybody who doesn't like Mario Brothers or isn't a Nintendo historian. You got to be one of those two things to enjoy this book. And for me, being a big time Mario fan, a big time like Nintendo nostalgist, and then just almost coming across this lost thing from my childhood, like, oh my god, this is that really weird, obscure thing I never thought I'd see again. I can't help but have warm feelings for it. But there's some genuinely clever and funny moments in this book. There's a moment where they there's a character they make up for the book named Floyd, who's this really shady salesman. They come across a Yoshi village, and everybody, like Yoshi do, they just say Yoshi. They can't actually talk, they just say Yoshi. This dude sells them a Yoshi language guide, and Floyd, this really shady salesman, and they show part of the page. It shows a guy, it says hello, and it says Yoshi. It says Yoshi. It says how are you? It says translated to Yoshi. Fine, thank you, Yoshi. Then they turn around, the guy's gone. He already has their money. It's things like that. There's also another scene that kind of works in a way, almost kind of like a Bugs Bunny. No, it's not Wabbit season, it's duck season kind of way. They stumble upon a haunted house, and some boos are coming after them. They're kind of realizing they got no way out of this, and this is something you could only get away with in a kid's book, but it works for it. Mario's cornered and Luigi's cornered. One of the boos walks in. Mario's playing Dr. Mario, sure enough, but he's being a psychiatrist. He's a psychiatrist to the boo, saying, I know it must have been hard growing up and being bullied and this and that. And as he's consulting this boo, trying to give it this, trying to get its life to turn around, Luigi breaks down, like, yes, I know, I went through the same things. Like, Mario's like, shut up, it's not about you. And then when they get out of there, they manage to turn all the boos on their side because they just help them with this revelation. Like, there's no need to fight. You just got to be yourself. It's a brave new world. And as soon as they're out of eyesight of the boos, so like Mario's smiling. It's one of my favorite panels of the book. He has this big smile on his face. It looks very genuine. As soon as they're out of eyesight, he's like, "Are they gone?" Yeah, good. And they just run off onto the next issue to save Peach. It's some of that kind of humor, which, once again, it's not like it's not like it's a Kevin Smith type writing or even something like Edgar Wright type humor. Even like actually that part seems maybe a little kind of Scott Pilgrimish, which is kind of Edgar Wrightish. But it's still one of those things where I think that it's more clever than what you'd assume this book would be. There's another thing. There's like because this whole book is basically just about Mario and Luigi working together to save Peach. Once they get Peach back on their side, it becomes about all of them working together to bring down Bowser. We get to a second issue at the last issue at the very end, which is kind of the introduction to Wario, which was pretty interesting because the way they introduced Wario is he and Mario were old childhood friends, and they kind of present it in this way that like Mario remembers them as being the closest of friends. Wario remembers it as Mario being a bully, and it's just one of those things you don't really think of. And at the very end, like they're just like, "Hey, man, I'm sorry I hurt your feelings. Let's be bros again." And then Mario, without even trying to, is accidentally being bullied. They'd always play cowboys and robbers, and Mario's just chasing them down. And Wario's like, no, not again, not again. So it has no problem being a little mean-spirited at times, which I think that's good because sometimes Nintendo's always too like, hey kids, sunshine and rainbows. I don't believe I gave the technical credit on this book. It's a story by Kentaro Tekuma. I know I'm butchering that name. I apologize. Not that I think you're going to hear it, but regardless, Kentaro Tekuma, and art by Charlie Nozawa. Now, the artwork in this, at a first glance, it looks like it's some things I don't. I mean, this episode is going to be sound like an old man. I remember there's a very particular kind of old school Japanese Nintendo style artwork you'd see. You'd flip when you're a kid, you'd flip through the strategy guide, and just the way the characters were drawn was just this very ingrained in my head. It had this very kind of cartoony Japanese look to it. Not like so much of your average kind of anime, but it just this very, I guess, something I guess you'd say maybe a Japanese Walt Disney kind of equivalent. I don't think it's too far away saying Mario is possibly the Japanese Mickey Mouse to some extent, because he's just, even though he's video games, but still, it's just one of those things. You see him, you know him when you see him. But he's kind of been group focused so much and brought to the front stream so much. We're used to seeing like this 3D Mario, where this artwork, it's very much the old 2D style, and it even in some places looks kind of scratchy and they get kind of deformed when they're frustrated. It's that kind of Japanese art style that I'm not used to seeing Mario in. I mean, at a first glance, when they just have Mario and Luigi looking like they usually do, they look like old school Mario and Luigi, as well as Yoshi and all the other characters. But when they're frustrated or scared or in the middle of the action, they have those very over dramatized facial expressions, which you only get in manga. And it's just interesting seeing that because you're not used to seeing these characters drawn that way. So, because, the only other time I really saw the characters in motion was aside from the movie, was the 90s TV show, and that's a very different kind of art style. And I know there's a Japanese anime that came to theaters back in the late 80s, but I never saw that one. I wouldn't mind checking it out eventually. But yeah, it's just something that really stands out, and it's just It's just something that I think if you are a Nintendo fan, it's definitely worth checking out. It will really take you back to your childhood. And I know right now a lot of people are burnt out on nostalgia, but I think this is some really good nostalgia, and it kind of reminds it to me. It kind of reminds me why I got into these characters and why I got into this in the first place. Because I wasn't one of those people who when I was younger, I liked Mario, but the game that really got me into Mario was Mario World, and that's what this book is primarily set at, is Mario World. And seeing it all, it's kind of reminded me why I got into it in the first place. And it's just such great character designs. It's funny when it needs to be, and just once I said it again, it's just Princess Peach is like probably one of the best parts of this whole book, which is funny when you think about it, but she's just a really strong, straightforward character. If they ever do another adaptation to Mario Brothers, whether it be a movie or animated show, I really hope they pull from this book and make Peach the way she is in this. So if you grew up playing a lot of Nintendo and you're kind of a nostalgist and you like comics, I'm gonna say check out Super Mario Adventures by Viz Media. It's a fun, quick little read. Once again, you're not reading a book by Grant Morrison or Scott Snyder here, but it's still a fun read. If you don't like Mario and if you're not into this book's not going to change your mind. But if you don't mind a trip down memory lane, definitely pick it up. It's worth your time. Well, that covers us for the first episode of OMO Comic Book Show. Like I said earlier, this might be a one and done thing. We're just trying something out here. If you liked what you heard here, be sure to go to oldmanorange.com and look up our main show, Old Man Orange Podcast. You got that on Stitcher, Podomatic, iTunes. Just go to oldmanorange.com. We got links to everything we do right there. That one's a little bit more of a free-flow conversation. This is me just rambling to myself into a microphone about books I like. But regardless, if you liked what you heard, follow me at Dunnigan Ryan at Twitter. I'm also at Grit5 on Instagram. Also, check out my friend Spencer Scott Holmes at Twitter. He's my co-host on my other show. And hope to see you again real soon. The music we're closing out with here is Them Strangers. So check them out too. All right, you have a good one, folks. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Old Man Orange podcast. Check out our website at oldmanorange.com for even more podcasts, cartoons, videos, music, and more. Send us an email at oldmanorangepodcast@yahoo.com. Be sure to subscribe, share, rate, and review us on iTunes, Podomatic, or any of the other fine sites we might be located on. And if you want to help out even more, click on the Amazon or GameStop links on our webpage before you make any purchases there. Won't cost you a penny, but it sends us a little something our way. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week to Old Man Orange.